50 years of powered flight. The story of the century. This is a story of what man has achieved in 50 years. We can record only the first chapter, the first 50 years. For it's a story of which all but the beginning has yet to be written. It opens with the opening of our own century, when King Edward VII was passing to his crowning through a gilt-edged world of gaslight and top hats. To the Englishman, the proper study of mankind was still the horse. True, technology was taking a sudden leap ahead. Coal and steam were under challenge. But even the new tooting electric tramway was somehow reassuring and familiar. Its wheels were firmly on the ground. Certainly, for many decades past, there had been signs and portents. There had been men like Lenardi, Sadler, Green, men impatient of an earthbound era, who had proved that hot air or gas enclosed within a fabric could carry them aloft. The balloonists were the first to overcome gravity. Born of the scientist's inquiry, in the hands of the showman, the balloon became a public spectacle. Sometimes, of course, gravity triumphed over the box office. But others, like the pioneer theorist Sir George Cayley, had been thinking differently. Henson, with his proposal for an aerial steam carriage. Stringfellow, building the first of all powered flying machines. Pilcher, developing a glider to be worn like harness on the human back. And those like Hargrave and Cody, who sought solutions in the kite. All were striving towards the same end, towards a means of obtaining sustained lift from outspread surfaces. Wilbur Wright and his brother Orville brought it all together. On December the 17th, 1903, the year our story opens, they left the ground at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in a motor-driven aeroplane. They flew for 284 yards. Powered flight had become reality. Now France began to take the lead. Santos-Dumont, first flyer of the old world in his famous 14 Bis. There was Voisin, too, his early seaplane glider braving the hazards of the Seine. It was this that led the way to a successful powered biplane. Santos-Dumont again in 1908, exploring the monoplane with his Demoiselle. You could almost call it the first motorcycle of the air. Then in that same year, 1908, the intent, lean face of Wilbur Wright was seen in France. He came to show the old world what his aeroplane could do. He showed it this. dimension added to man's movement. Now the flights could swoop above the fields. But what of the sea? What of the channel? Latham in the Antoinette was first to try in 1909. To try and gallantly to fail. Engines were still unreliable. There was so much to learn. The next was Louis Bleriot. He was the great exponent of the monoplane, the type that was to become the sporting, racing aircraft of the day. He took off from French soil on July the 25th, 1909, in a monoplane of his own build, the Bleriot XI bis, with an Anzani engine. Took off and conquered the channel. From that day, they said, England ceased to be an island. Crossing the sea, the aeroplane crosses the threshold of public imagination. At the Rheims meeting of 1909, one of the events is the champagne contest for distance. It's Poland with the Voisin versus Lefebvre in the right. And Latham in the Antoinette is there, making the record distance of 154 kilometers. None who were present have forgotten the excitement of those early meetings. Blackpool, Doncaster, Bournemouth, Brooklyn, the quiver of taut fabric in the wind, the rotary engine and the reek of castor oil. There are aircraft in numbers now. And with numbers comes competition. And out of competition, the great names emerge. Grace, Moore Brabazon, the Farman, Ogilvy, Dixon, Coburn, Rose. And then Grahame-White and the London to Manchester race of 1910, 186 miles. Confidently, Grahame-White takes off from Wormwood Scrubs. But at Rugby, the pocket windsocks are out. He's in trouble. Trees flirting with his undercarriage, in he comes. A final teeth-clenched lift, and he's safely down. But Grahame-White's luck is out. Quickly, he refuels. But Henry Farman sadly declares the undercarriage beyond repair, and Poland wins. Now the Daily Mail is offering £50 for a flight from London to Paris. Moisson wins the prize. In 1911, the aeroplane first showed what it could do as a means of transport. The Coronation Aerial Post from Hendon to Windsor. Hamel flew the first. And the mail got through. Then the airman's map was broadening out to international contests, like the Circuit of Europe. With flyers like Manton, Gordon Bell, Beaumont, and Robert Lorraine taking part. This is Hux adjusting his map. The monoplane men were in the lead, often flying Bleriot aircraft. But in Britain, there came a check to the monoplane's development. A series of accidents due to structural failures led the War Office to impose a ban on single-wing machines. From that moment on, though the ban only lasted a few months, the biplane was to reign supreme for some 20 years. But the interest of the services was now aroused. That which could fly could fight. And at Lark Hill in 1912, Cody won the first prize at the military trials. But the most practical aircraft turned out to be the BE2, designed by Geoffrey de Havilland. It was this biplane that was adopted as the official government military aircraft, to be developed by the government at an establishment later to become world-renowned, the Royal Aircraft Factory at Farnborough. But not without private competition, for the Sopwith Tabloid was coming forward, first of a famous line of fighting aircraft. And 2 years later, a tabloid was on floats. The place, Monaco. The occasion, the Schneider Trophy race. The top speed, 86 miles an hour. It was the first time Britain took part, and she won. The pilot was Howard Pixton, and the year was 1914. Behind the trenches, behind the guns, behind the long lines of supply, a new word, a new force was coming into being. Air power. The first aeroplanes were warming up for war. Among them, the BE2s and the early Farmans. Then came the single-seater Scouts, wooden wire-braced biplanes like the Sopwith Pup. And from the same stable, the 1.5 Strutter, the first two-seater fighter. Then later came the Camel. Well named, it seemed, to bear the burden of long and furious combat hand-to-hand. Perhaps the most successful fighter of the First World War. It had a celebrated contemporary, too, Follen's SE-5 from Farnborough. Was this the first time in history, and the last, that an army charged with yesterday beneath it and tomorrow overhead? From the German aerodromes, the Fokkers rose, D-7s, surging in their formidable squadrons towards the Allied lines. The day of the dogfight and the aces, Bishop and Richthofen, Ball, Mammoth, McCudden, Goering. The day when a man could become a legend in a few hours, in the fastest fighting that the world had known. And other purposes of war awaited aviation. For Britain, the adding of a new wing to her sea power was essential. The first experiments were made with Shorts and Sopwiths. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they did not. Still the trials went on. How to give the fleet a sharper eye, a longer arm. How to get an aircraft off the deck, into the air, onto the deck again. And if results were not to bear important fruit for many years, it was not for want of trying. Meanwhile, through the urgent days, with the U-boats tightening their hold, the short seaplanes carried on their sterling service on patrol. They were land-based or Sweeping from the deck of a converted cruiser, they foreshadowed the carrier aircraft yet to come. And as the war years lengthened out, John Port's flying boats came down the ways at Felixstowe. Big seagoing machines whose descendants were to give Britain a great period of dominance in civil aviation later on. For a decade, Count Zeppelin had been developing the rigid airship. London was to grow familiar with his name. He was among the first to show that in a fighting world, there could be no more civilians. One bomb is answered by a larger, carried further, faster. On the Allied side as well, loads, ranges, speeds were growing. The FE-2B was one bomber that threw its shadow across the enemy lines. So it passed, the aeroplane's first war. By the end of it, the Sopwith Snipe was with the world's first air force, the RAF. And the big bomber was the Handley Page 0400. But perhaps the leaping progress of those years is best summed up in the aircraft you see here. Just 4 years had gone by from the flimsy, almost defenseless Farman to the sturdy, warlike speed and lines of Barnwell's Bristol fighter. Before the palace railings, in the peace procession, in the silent mists of Scarpa and the Forth, one challenge ended, but in the air another opened, the world itself. Who, for instance, would conquer the Atlantic? The Americans made it first, in an NC-4 flying boat via the stepping stones of the Azores. But who non-stop? Hawker and Mackenzie Grieve were the first to try. They mounted their attack from a field like a switchback in Newfoundland, in the Sopwith Atlantic. By sheer bad luck, due to no fault of plane or engine, they failed. Almost at once, Alcock and Brown decided that the time had come. Newfoundland again, west to east. But this time it was a Vickers-Vimy. Eastward over 1,700 miles of empty sea, then suddenly dry land. And a rough and ready welcome in an Irish bog. On June the 14th, 1919, man was Admiral of the Ocean Air. So far, in its youthful years, the aeroplane had been bold, then bellicose, then brave. Now it became reliable. For in the year of the Atlantic, the RAF was flying the first scheduled aerial post. Hawkinge to Cologne was the route, with the mail for the occupation army. Hawkinge to Cologne, or was it Aix to Ghent? Helter-skelter through the sheep, over the wave tops, down among the turnips. But within hours instead of days, the watch on the Rhine had news of home. Reliable and then responsive. Just 16 years after Kitty Hawk, Holt Thomas's company was carrying the first passengers between Hounslow and Paris on the basis of a published timetable. Back over the trail of Louis Bleriot. Then the years of fever floated in. The years of cocktails and cloche hats and flappers. Of Hobbs and Sutcliffe. Of the Langlon Bandeau at Wimbledon. Of everyone at Wembley. The twitching 20s with the Charleston and Stepping Out and it. The antic years that saw the life and death of a demigod whose earthly name was Rudolph Valentino. There was the tension of the 20s, too. Unemployment and the fear of it. There was the Baldwin pipe, the MacDonald moustache, and a coming man called Ernest Bevin. In post-war perplexity, the wheels of industry might slow and stop. But there were other means of getting places, doing things, achieving thrills and spills and chills. There were other high roads to release, until in those tormented years, the most satisfying spectacle in all the world became the sight of objects being smashed to smithereens. No wonder that the 20s found earthbound civilians eager for the air. That this should be the period of the joyride and the 5-bob flip in machines like the old Avro 504. Yet behind it, for the world of flying, lay a sobering paradox. Planes of the past, released from war, enjoyed the public eye. But little new was stirring. And the aircraft industry itself stood uncertain in the aftermath. But in 1925, there came a sign. The first de Havilland Moth. And with this most famous light aeroplane, there came for the ordinary citizen, man or woman, the chance of serious study of the sky. The Moth made possible the weekend pilot and the flying club. And they in turn, in word and deed, fostered that asset so vital to all nations in this century, the airfaring outlook. And at the same time, another side. The formation of Imperial Airways. Its aim, to open the British Empire to the air. Croydon and the old Argosy, the airliner par excellence of the late 1920s. The last to have an office open to the winds of heaven. Then the 30s brought a revolution in the HP-42. With her 4 engines, with her solid, stately shape, the nature of flight itself seemed to be transformed. The trilby and the briefcase, the fur coat and the hotel label are entering the airman's world. Perhaps already something of the tang of adventure is passing. The air is becoming part and parcel of society, business, diplomacy. Departure has become a ceremonial. And the airman himself is changing too. In the covered cockpit, the leather coat has become the captain's uniform. Gold braided at the controls, experienced, reassuring. The long ship has become the galleon. And the aids and disciplines are with us now, the control tower and radio navigation. A merchant fleet is aloft, and it has to know with reasonable accuracy where the devil it is. So Hannibal, Hanno, and their kind drove back the horizons, always a little further. First Arabia, then on to India. And great aircraft they were. Through all their years of service, they never lost a passenger. They were still flying in the Second World War. Their cruising speed in still air was less than 100 miles an hour. Yet they put Sharjah across the road from Cheltenham.